We're going to dig into that. We're going to continue into our study series on overcoming obstacles, whether this be obstacles within our community, obstacles within our lives, obstacles within the church. Specifically, I think for us as a church, we're looking at the things tying into this prayer that we've been praying for the last year and a half. We just really feel like God's moving to another state, another season, another level, however you want to call it. But this prayer has been constantly just digging into praying that God builds us up, that He prepares the road before us, and that we remove the obstacles from in front of His children. And so that's what a big chunk of this series has been, is how do we overcome obstacles in our lives. And we've been doing that by going through the book of Joshua. So if you want, you can go ahead and open up your Bibles already as we kind of get ready and kind of head that way. We're going to Joshua chapter 9. It's towards the front of the book, right after probably the first 5 books or so, kind of detailing Moses' testimony. Now we're moving into Joshua, who took his place and moved forward with the Israelites. And they had a lot of obstacles to overcome, so we've been studying their lives on how that works. And there's a lot that we've unpacked already. I think this is week 7 in this series. I'm not going to overview all of that. Next week is our last week in this series, unless the Spirit throws some kind of surprise out of left field. And we're going to really kind of bring it all together next week. But there is a little bit I want to recap so that we're all in the same place. So if you're coming in fresh, we're all in this, being able to dig into the series and understand where we're at today. As we're looking at overcoming obstacles, and again, anytime that God has something for us in our lives, anything is something that good that He wants to put in, we know the obstacles are the thing that follows right after that. Whether it be emotional struggles, whether that be mental struggles, whether that be circumstances in our lives, or we lose our job, or a bill comes in that we forgot about, or was unexpected, or you have to fix the pipes at the house, at the church, but those things come up because Satan wants to stop the goodness of what God wants flowing through your life. And so we have to be prepare for that, know how to deal with that, because it always happens. It always happens. It's just how Satan is. It's how God works. And so we have to look at how we can identify these obstacles, understand them, cross over them. And as we were going through it last week, we really talked about, in one section of it, the power of one. That was one of the things. This is a journaling series that has a lot of bullet points, so we can bring them all together at the end. And one of the bullet points was the power of one, that each one of us, period, have a lot more power and influence than we realize that we do. And it really depends on how we leverage that or use that on whether or not it's good or bad. Last week we covered where one person in the Israelites defied God, that when they were victorious over a people, he's told them destroy everything, and he's like, man, I like that cloak, and I think I want to keep that cloak, and no one's going to know, and no one really cares. And he took some silver, and he took some gold, and how it impacted everybody from God's viewpoint, and the struggle they had, and they lost a battle because of this one guy, and they didn't even know he did it. Like that, he had power to have a negative influence within the community, within what God was doing. And we looked at, from the same standpoint, we have power to do great things when it comes to being on the positive side of things. And again, we looked at Noah from that standpoint. If Noah at any point up before the flood said, this whole God thing, I don't think I want to really deal with that anymore, I don't know I really believe in that, then none of us would be here. It was because of Noah's faithfulness that the world was saved in the flood. And so we've got this truth that there's power that we all have that we can either leverage for the kingdom or lean into the obstacles that can either bring great testimony or can bring incredible struggle, hopelessness, anxiety, depression. I mean, there's a big chunk of how we react, whether it be fear or faith, like we've been talking about, into these things to be able to see what that power of one has. And I want to bring that back to the forefront because today we're not going to just focus on the power of one, but we're going to focus on the power of the one true God. That's going to be a big chunk of what we're talking about today. So I wanted to bring that back to the forefront and dig into Joshua's story again to be able to see another situation that they go through that's a little different than what we've seen so far. So that will lead us up into chapter 9, and we'll do the usual. We'll read a little, talk a little, and see what we've got that applies to our lives today. So with that, verse 1. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea, towards Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho, where the walls fell down and they had total victory there, and to Ai, which now they've had victory there instead of the first failure that they had, so now they're concerned and they're taking notice. When they heard about all these things, they on their part, the Gibeons, took and acted with cunning. And they went and they made provisions, and they took worn-out sacks for their donkeys. They took wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us." So let's set the scene just a little bit. Again, Joshua's had several victories as God has given them those victories. We've seen how that works. When they don't lean into God, how it fell apart. When they leaned into God, followed his instructions, called to him, how things went well. And that is continuing to grow their reputation as they continue into the promised land against the enemies and the inhabitants of the promised land. And so in this time, instead of a city going against them, they're like, wait a minute, this is getting out of control. Let's build an alliance. And so they're trying to get people together from the different communities to go up against Joshua and the Israelites. In this, one of the cities, and we're going to find out a little bit later in this text, that it was a great city. It had a ton of fighting men, and it was so big and rich with resources and fighting men that it was considered like the royal cities. It was a massive city. This isn't Ai, like we talked about last week, where they only had a few thousand, and they thought, oh, we could take them, no problem. This is a great city, and they look at the situation, and they know about this alliance, but they say, you know what? We are so terrified of this God and these people, we're going to go and deceive ourselves into salvation. That's basically what's happening. We're going to dress in our worst clothes. We're going to make our donkeys and our travels look like we've been on the road forever. And we're going to go to them and not let them know who we are, not let them realize that we're the enemy, but we're going to come in and say, we just want to be your servants. We just need your protection. We stumbled into this whole thing by accident. What in the world is going on in this land? And they want to be able to lean into a way that Joshua will protect them and accept them by deceiving him on who they are. So there's a lot of deceitfulness within this. Now, Joshua, as you continue into it, and again, some of the scripture I will take and let you read at home and do continue studying. I hope you do go deeper in and double check all this and see what the Spirit has for you. But Joshua is not just taken by this. Joshua is very suspicious about what's going on. It's like, okay, now wait a minute. Where are you guys from? And what's going on? And they keep taking and coming back to that same image that they're trying to portray, the deceitfulness that they have, the self-control that they're trying to have. And they keep coming back to this phrase that you see in verse 6. So now make a covenant with us. If you go back down verse 11, if you have it there, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. They continue to try to get them to make a covenant. And Joshua look at the situation and goes, well, I guess this all adds up. I guess this all makes sense. And so he ends up leaning into this request that they continually make of make a covenant with us. Look at verse 14. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore to them. Now, did you get the same? We've seen them make this mistake before. In no way, shape, or form did they take and go to the counsel of the Lord. It makes sense. They're seeking us out. They're very humble. They want to be our servants. We'll make this covenant with them. So with this, we're going to start giving you some bullet points. Again, don't always do like the big bullet point thing, but this has been pivotal in this particular study. And the first bullet point I'm going to give you is this. Covenants are serious business. Covenants are serious business, and it's something that we have lost today. Now, to understand this, let me talk again a little bit about covenants. I usually talk about covenants when we're talking about church membership, because church membership is a type of covenant. And I'm going to use the same kind of explanation, the same examples, but it gets us all on the same page. There are two types of covenants that we see scripturally. There are covenants that God makes with his people, and there's covenants that we make with one another. When it comes to the covenants of God, he's God. He lays out the terms. There's not a lot of dialogue between us on how things are going to go. God knows better than I do. He doesn't think the way that I do. And he puts covenants in place. And covenants always come with the tangible. And that tangible is in place to show both the people involved, or God and the people, that this is in place. One of the most famous ones is the rainbow. When you look at the story of Noah, and there's wickedness on the earth, and God destroys the world by flood and saves Noah and his family and the animals in the ark. Eventually, all the water dries up. The ark's on dry ground. Noah comes out. He worships God. And God says, look, I'm going to make a covenant with you. I will never destroy this earth again by flood. That's the covenant. That's the terms. There's not a lot for Noah to consider. It's like, oh, okay, God. It's just whether or not you kind of accept what God has. And then he says, here's my tangible. I'm going to put the rainbow in the sky. And that rainbow is going to be a sign to you and to me that I made this promise to you. And that kind of weirds me out a little bit because I like rainbows. I love taking pictures of rainbows. We all put them on Facebook. We all get really encouraged. They're so beautiful. They're so sweet. But to kind of think that sometimes every once in a while God's thinking, oh, maybe I'll flood this whole thing again. Oh, no, there's a rainbow. That's right. I promised him I wouldn't. It's a covenant. And thankfully it's a covenant, and it's not a breaking covenant, and he will never destroy the earth by flood again. Matter of fact, the only time we have anything when it comes to destroying the earth is going to be by fire in the end of days to make room for the new heaven and the new earth. So that covenant's in place. When it comes to us, again, the normal example that I have is if two people make a covenant with one another, again, there's a tangible and it's a serious bond. In Jesus' time, as I've shared with you multiple times, if two men decided they were going to have their kids get married, that was a negotiation. And it'd be like, okay, you get so many sheep and you get so many donkeys, whatever that negotiation becomes. And then when they have an agreement on it, it becomes a covenant. And at that time, the tangible was to reach across and grab each other's thigh to show we're in this, and it was non-breaking. It's kind of like the what would you call it, the good old days, like when a handshake meant a contract. It was just that kind of integrity. It was serious. It did not get broken. The reason we talk about this when it comes to church membership is because church membership, and again, that's a whole big different conversation. And again, if you really want to dig into that from a biblical standpoint, you can go into our YouTube channel and look up membership. We did a series, 5-week series last summer, really digging into what the Bible has about that. But church membership this is what you can expect from the church if you say, this is my local body church, and this is what the Bible says I should be expected of as a member. And I want to be part of that here. And so the tangible, there's a tangible within that as far as a sheet and going through classes and having a conversation and sit down and have coffee together to have a tangible of this covenant. That doesn't mean you're stuck in a particular church for the rest of your life, unless the membership is really structured kind of strangely. But it means something. And the reason why people move from church to church so easily right now is because we have a consumeristic attitude of, well, it doesn't feel like it used to anymore. There's a little bit of an issue, or there's some kind of struggle going on, and I don't want to be a part of that, so I'll just go down the street, is not what membership is when it comes to a covenant. These things are serious. And so whenever somebody says, I want to be a church member, or I want to get married, or I want to do that, when you're looking at these covenants, know what you're getting into, and make a commitment into what you're going into because they matter. We're going to see how that plays out here. Because Joshua makes a covenant with them that they will not be destroyed, and he swears that to them, and then 3 days later finds out they were lying, that they were actually the enemy, that they're part of the obstructions and the obstacles that were supposed to be destroyed and not dealt with and not entertained anymore. But he has now sworn to God and made this covenant for them. And because of the fear of the Lord, they're now in this covenant. He can't do anything about it. Think about that. Any of us would be like, I'm just going to we're taking them out back and giving them a good whooping. No, they lied to us. It's not fair. It's not the covenant. They made a covenant, and it was a serious covenant. And so he said to them, look, I made this covenant, and we will not take you on. But that's all I promised you, so you will always be our servants. We need water to go get, you get to go get the water. We need something built, you get to build it. You're going to have a life of struggle, but you're going to have a life because covenants matter. And we're going to see that God thinks covenant matters to the point that he actually bent to protect them as well. even though it was against his will, because they never looked to him. Which is the second point that I want to put into this, is because, again, they never looked to the counsel of the Lord. Second point, and we've seen this repeated, is there's error by walking by sight. There's an error by walking by sight instead of the counsel of the Lord. This repeats because we repeat the mistake over and over again. We need to really consider this truth that you and I are designed by nature to go by our circumstances, to go by our own self-control, to go by I can stand on my own, the control of I did this before and I did it this way, so I'll just do it that way again. Instead of being people who quickly come to the Lord, quickly come into his word, quickly understand what his promises are so that we can depend upon them, quickly encourage each other with the word of admonishment or encouragement, quickly go into prayer, and we continue to go by walking by sight. In Joshua's situation, he walked by sight. This all makes sense to me. It seems good. Ended up leading to a covenant that put them in a really messed up place, completely contrary to what God had told them to do. From the Gibeonites, the exact same thing happened. They were walking by sight as well. We see this battle. We see this battle. We see that they're victorious. We don't want to do the alliance. I don't think we're going to win against them. I think we're going to self-control this. I mean, the same things that you and I do with our checkbooks, the same things you and I do with our schedule, the same thing that we do with our relationships. I don't think this is going to work out, and I think I'm going to try to self-control it. I'm going to take and maintain this, and God's called me by faith here, but I'm going to move this over here. And they did things to be able to submit to God, but not in the same way that the Israelites did, and with a very different result. Does that make sense? And so they were saved, but they didn't have the same relationship with God that they could have had if it was different. What if the Gibeonites, instead of going by sight, they realize that God is the God, and they realize they're not going to win against him and that they need him? What if they just simply went to Joshua and say, look, we're the Gibeonites, and we believe your God is God, and we want to submit to him. We want to be part of this. And here's the keys to our gate of our city. Everything we just surrender to God. How can we be a part of it? Would have been a very different story than them trying to control it by sight. But yet we do this all the time. And it leads me to the third point. Third point is this. Submission differences lead to different foundations. The reason you submit to God, if you do, will really depend on what kind of foundation, what kind of relationship you have with him. There are people all the time, like the Gibeonites basically reflect us. I mean, we're all sinners, right? We've all fallen short of the glory of God. We all were lost without him, right? And there are people who look at that and will continue to reject it. There are those that look at that and say, okay, I need forgiveness, I need salvation. And they come to Jesus and, again, accept him as leader and forgiver in their lives, acknowledge with the mouth he's Son of God, believe in their hearts he died and rose again, just like Romans tells us, and say, I need to say this prayer because I don't want to go to hell. I mean, I don't want to go to hell. And so they'll say the prayer just to kind of get that checked off, and then they spend the rest of their life trying to be good because they're afraid they're going to make God mad, or that God's going to take it back, or they're going to just fall on the face, or whatever case it may be, but they're always in fear. And that's the response of the Gibeonites. And that's how they have this servant situation, this servant attitude, is because they're constantly trying to be good enough. They're constantly trying to get there. But if you come to Jesus and say, I want to be in this because this is who I was made to be. This is I'm a child of God. I want his salvation. I want his life. I want to give it back to the one who created it because I'm obviously messing it up. I'm obviously having some kind of disconnect, and I want to be a part of this. I want to be part of his family, and I want the victory of God. I want the power of the Holy Spirit residing within me so that I can take on these challenges in this life. All of a sudden, now you're Joshua and the Israelites going out to overcome obstacles. There's a very real difference between the Gibeonites and the Israelites in this situation, and it's very real still today. If you're afraid of God, it's one thing to be respectful for, yes, he's God. He sneezes, I'm wiped out. I get that. He's God, I'm not. I get that. But if I'm constantly afraid of my father because I see him as some kind of militant abuser, it's a very different relationship than the freedom and the power that he has called us to have. Does that make sense? And that's very much put into this between this fear submission and this hope victory submission when it comes to our salvation. And so we're called to a completely different relationship. So we got a very kind of messed up situation going on here because of self-control, not leaning to God, this fear that's there, but nonetheless it is a situation, and God does make beauty out of ashes. Thank God he makes beauty out of ashes and what we bring to him. So this is kind of really the layup or the foundation for chapter 10. So if you would, let's go to chapter 10 and see how this plays out, because it really does have an interesting impact in this next section that I want to make sure that we cover before we get to the end of our series. In 10, things have kind of died back down, okay, as far as with the Gibeonites. And they've gone back to their place, and the Israelites are still camped. And a situation comes to be when that first part of chapter 9 comes back with some more detail. It says, and I'm going to mess up some of these names, and you know me, I don't care. As soon as Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, what an unfortunate name, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted it to destruction, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them now, he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all of its men were warriors. So again, we bring to the forefront that Gibeon was a major city and a powerful city. And so Jerusalem puts together this alliance. There's Jerusalem, there's Hebron, there's Jarmuth, the Chish, Eglon, are all coming together to make war. But one thing I want to make sure that you notice is that there's some human logic going on here, that he did not make war yet against the Israelites. His war first is to go against the Gibeonites, the ones that formerly were allies that had now become traitors to him. Because if they can be defeated, then it'd be easier to take on the Israelites. Do you catch that? In verse 2, he was afraid because the Gibeonites were so powerful, and they had just handed over the keys. And so he decides to make war against the Gibeonites. Let's go down to verse 6. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, "Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us." So Joshua went up to Gilgal, he and all the people were with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you." I'm going to read verse 8, because this is so important within this particular testimony. "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you." Thus is the promise of God to Joshua. If you know the promises of God, which you will find here, then you can count on the promises of God when you're out there. Okay? So that's very, very important into the story. So in this little section, it takes, and we hit some things as far as surrender, looking to God. I bring some things back up with that covenant, because again, God's plan was not to protect the Gibeonites, but that covenant changed it. And so God is now with them. Do not be afraid. Move forward. Verse 9. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent from Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Ezkah and Makkah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azkah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. Look at this particular section from two different standpoints. There's what Joshua did, because again, if we're going to overcome obstacles, we have to assume we're doing our part. He marched all night. When he came up on them suddenly, he was tired. The guys were tired. This is forcing it to get there in ample time. So they are tired, they're not at their best, but they're coming into battle anyways with everything they've got. That's what Joshua had. But God, there was a promise here, so we didn't have to be worried about this because God was going to intervene and no one would stand before us. And God takes and starts throwing them into a panic, and they start running. So before they even get to him with the swords, it's already going in their favor. Then God decides, wouldn't it be fun to get some big old hailstones and just start stoning them to death? And so God starts pelleting them left and right. And the author of the text wants to make sure that it's very known to us that when it comes to the victory that's happening here within this obstacle, God did a lot more than Joshua did. That the miracles came into play. The things that you and I have no control over came into play. The things that you and I have no idea are going to happen came into play. The things that worked out in such a way that we would never foresee it that way took and ended up coming into play. And he didn't need to know those details because he knew of God's promise, and God's got us. Does that make sense? That is what happens when we come into a relationship with Christ because of the hope of his victory instead of fear. That's what happens when we're doing faith steps instead of trying to do self-control and the obstacles that are in our lives. When we say, I need you, God, and I know that you're the answer, things turn very differently. And as if that's not crazy enough, verse 12. At that time, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel, and he said in the sight of everybody, Sun, stand still at Gibeon. Moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Joshua? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. This is when we start seeing the power of one, Joshua being obedient, and the power of the one God really come together. And that is the next point, is we've got to just really get our mind around the power of that one true God. That one true God. Here's what happened. Joshua saw that it was becoming night. If it becomes night, some of these guys get to sneak away. Some of these guys have a chance to escape. Problem is, that's not what God promised. What God promised is not a one will stand before us. And so the only thing here truly logical, if I believe in the promises of God, is for the day not to end. Isn't that nuts? But he confidently, it's a confident prayer for him to say, the sun's not going to move, the moon's not going to move. God's promise is it's just going to happen. It's just going to have to happen. It's not that man has power over God, but God has already promised, so that's the only thing here. And it didn't. And I know some people are like, man, you take the earth off the axis by 1 inch, everything blows up. It's true. You watch History Channel or Nature Channel, all that kind of stuff. There's a perfect rhythm to all of creation. But I've never fully got, if you're a God believer who set science into place, for someone not to realize that God can take and make exceptions whenever he wants. Whenever he wants. I can count on science unless the God changes his mind about something, then I'm just going to have to roll with it because he's God and I'm not. And I'm not going to take away from the miracle or the confidence that Joshua was able to have because the power of the one true God working in unison with the one that he called and that he had promised. And so they stopped. They stopped. The power of the one true God, a commanding prayer. The power of the one. Point 5. The power of one with the one true God. The power of the one with the one true God. You and I have so little control or understanding, but when we partner with the one true God as his children, praying confidently. When's the last time you prayed confidently because of a promise of God in spite of the circumstances? Everything really does come together. Now, I want to stop and look at this from a life app standpoint for a second, and I really want you to stop and listen. And I mean that sincerely. And some of that's to, again, our Facebook Live folks, at home and dogs barking in the background, and clean the kitchen while you listen to the sermon in the background, all that kind of stuff. And I really do ask you just to stop and be very mindful about this time. And in-house, to be very mindful about this time, because we're talking about some things that repeat because we repeatedly struggle with them. We're going to have some of the same challenges that we've heard before and that we have not submitted to. We have not seriously let ourselves in a holy struggle deal with the reality of what God's calling us to when it comes to these obstacles. And I really want to pause here. I just pray, Father, that you let us hear your Spirit during this time as we reflect on these next few thoughts, these next few truths, and that your Spirit moves in such a way that you raise up 1, 2, 3 things, whatever amount that you want in our lives. Maybe it's just one key issue that's impacting so many other things. Maybe things are going well, but there's one struggle that we continue to hold back on. I just pray that you make us very mindful in a second to hear your Spirit as we reflect on what we're about to dig into, and let you have your way here. In your name, in your victory, amen. I want to stop and look at what does it mean when you entered into a covenant with Jesus Christ by accepting him as a leader and forgiver in your life. Okay? I know some people going through this maybe never have. You might know all there is to know about God, and you've gone to VBS, and you've gone to church camp, all that stuff. And if you're in that place, I pray that you listen to this and consider entering into that covenant that brings salvation but also brings victory into your life. But we have to stop and pause sometimes and say, okay, when Jesus offered up this forgiveness and grace and new life through the tangible of his blood and his victory by coming out of the resurrected grave, and I said yes, what did I say yes to? What does that very serious covenant mean? 1, you denounce the world. You denounce the world. We are not of it. We are in it, but we are not of it. We do not think like the world. We do not act like the world. We are not dictated to by the world. There are times that you will take hits, especially as we get more craziness of 2020 going on, but you will get more hits in conversations, in social media, and in your relationships, and in your family, because we run differently than the rest of the world. Now, that does not mean we become martyrs and we start trashing on everybody and we all become like social media warriors, but we do run different. And you denounce the world. So stop dancing with the world. Stop making decisions off of the worldly thinking. Have you been living up to that commitment in that covenant, that very serious covenant? It means that you turned from sin. When you accept Jesus as leader and forgiving your life, you've turned away from not just the world, but sin. And some of us choose to keep a certain percentage of our life in sin because we like it. And it's caused problems, and it's caused struggles in our relationships, and it causes guilt, different stuff. But when it comes down to it, and it comes down to the moment, we like to gossip, or we like porn, or we like any number of sins that could be out there that continues to lead us back into bondage. The simple fact is, if you accepted Jesus as leader and forgiving your life, you've denounced it. Stop grabbing a hold of it. A covenant with Jesus Christ means that you are following him. That you're following him. We've talked often about that moment right before Jericho when Joshua was looking upon Jericho and then looked up and saw the commander of the Lord. I spoke about that again yesterday at the rally downtown. We've got to understand the obstacles. We've got to see the obstacles. That's part of the process that we have explored and discovered. But if we're always looking at the obstacles and we're not looking up to Jesus, we've already lost the battle. We've already lost. I'm looking to Jesus. I'm following Jesus. I'm becoming more like Jesus. Another thing that it means is that you've joined his family. None of us accept Jesus as leader and forgiver in our lives to be orphans. It just doesn't work that way. We are part of his family. We have encouragement. We have relationship. We have sharpening of one another. And that's got to be a priority for us. Now, it needs to shape our decisions. Now, I'm going to say something that you guys got to give me a lot of grace on, because I think most people watching this know my heart, and I'm not beating anybody up. But we're going to see some of our commitments in this area over the next month and a half. I truly believe this. We've been talking through this whole pandemic about how everything stopped. And when we get to the other side of it, what will that look like? Is it just we all took a vacation and then we just went back normal, or did God do something here that something's different now? And so as things are reopening, we're going to see decisions on how we plug back into Christian community. I mean, this is a massive conversation across pastors across the nation that I've had multiple conversations on that I'm not too stressed out about, maybe just because I'm ignorant. But I believe in Christian community, and I believe we have Christian community here on a level that we miss it. But we have decisions to make. And some of us, again, some folks are here. That doesn't mean you're more dedicated than others. There's a lot of valid concerns out there. And I'm not saying any of that, but over the next month, as things open up more and more, barring any major changes, what will we do when it comes to Christian community? Will we plug in, or will we pull back? And I think, just like our finances, what decisions we make with our money will reveal our heart about finances in our life versus God. Same thing with our time. If we're saying, I'm too scared to go to church, or I'm too scared to plug in with Christian community, but yet we're going to about birthday parties and graduation parties and Myers and movies and all this other stuff, and I'm worried about church, what decisions we make will reflect our heart. I guess that's all I'm trying to say. And it's something to consider. Where are we with community? Do we have community as part of our life? Do we miss it when we can't have it? A covenant with Jesus means this. It means that you decided you're going to become a disciple. You've made a conscious decision to be a disciple, which means you're going to be in this. And you're going to learn. And you're going to become more like Jesus. And you're going to grow to be more like Jesus. And you're going to be an ambassador for Jesus, which means you reflect him in the world with your example and your words. And you're going to give testimony for Jesus, which means you speak about him. You've made a covenant with Jesus. And please don't start trailing off now just because the prayer was 5 minutes ago. It means that you're committing yourself to reach out, to share your testimonies, to share Jesus, to share the gospel, to know who around you is still lost, to look past your comfort zone and speak Jesus into their lives. And then there's also a covenant that you would disciple others. That as you walk down this road with Jesus, that you're mindful there's other people behind you on that road. I've got mentors in my life, people that are further down the road than me, but I'm expected, as part of my blessing, to be able to look at those behind me on the road and say, let me disciple you, be the example for you, use my gifts and my spiritual gifts and my talents and my resources and my time to be able to reach back and to disciple others, to prepare them, to teach them, to encourage them. You entered into a covenant with Jesus Christ. It's a serious thing. Covenants are serious business, but yet we continue to walk by the error of walking by sight. Some of us submit because of fear and some because of hope, and these lead to very different places. But if we live in hope and we live by victory and we live by the Holy Spirit, then we have the power of the one true God moving in our lives, and we are dancing with him. And there is nothing that he can't do through the power of one, dancing with the power of the one true God. Does that all make sense? And I'm going to be honest with you. If you're really rolling with this, and you're not just kind of going out in the la-la land or thinking about other things or other distractions going on, there should be something on your heart right now. There just should. If there's not, then you're perfect. And boy, I really would like you to come up and talk next week. I don't know how you do that, but something should be on your heart right now. Stop excusing it. Stop embracing it. Lay it down.